Have you ever noticed that after a certain kind of heartbreak, the word love doesn't feel like a warm embrace anymore? It starts to sound like a warning bell you ignored for too long. The flutter in your chest that you once called destiny begins to feel less like magic and more like a predictable chemical reaction. A story your desperate mind wrote about a stranger, just so you wouldn't have to sit alone in the quiet. You start to wonder, maybe love didn't disappear. Maybe you just finally got tired of lying to yourself about what it actually was. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the human soul, once suggested that what we often chase isn't love at all, but a mirror. We don't see the other person. We see a reflection of our own fragmented self, and we rush to glue that reflection onto another human being, calling it fate. But in that initial rush, we aren't falling for them. We're falling into the intoxicating relief that someone has finally arrived to fill the cavernous silence inside us. So, here is the question that changes everything. Is the love you're chasing right now truly about the person you're with? Or is it just a sophisticated way to avoid the sound of your own footsteps echoing in the emptiness? In the next part, we are going to walk straight into the territory that most romantic stories are terrified of. We're going to ask why your greatest love affair might actually be a cry for help from the parts of you you've abandoned, and why seeing that is the most painful and the most liberating thing you will ever do. Chapter 1. The Unconscious Pact. Part 1. Before the lights come on, we don't love. We borrow. We call it falling in love. It sounds poetic, like tumbling into a soft bed of flowers. But through the lens of depth psychology, it looks more like an evacuation. We don't step into a relationship consciously. We dive into it the way someone fleeing a burning building jumps out a window. It's not that the street below looks inviting. It's that staying inside with the fire is unbearable. Notice this. Think back to the moments you loved the hardest. Weren't they often the moments you were most exhausted with your own life? A job that felt pointless, a stretch of boredom that gnawed at your bones, a quiet desperation you couldn't name. And then, suddenly, a new face appears. A few late-night conversations, a glance across a room, a text that says, "I get you." Your heart races. The world turns from gray to vibrant. You call it a miracle. But if you're brutally honest, it looks less like a miracle and more like a psychological life raft. Finally, something, anything, that keeps you from having to confront the silence within. Jung once observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Those hollow spaces, those unsettling questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually want? Why does my own presence feel so empty? We don't have the tools to sit with those questions. They are uncomfortable. So, we search for an exit. And love, or, more precisely, the sensation of being chosen, becomes the ultimate painkiller. Instead of sitting with our own anxiety, we throw ourselves into a vortex of texting, planning, fantasizing about shared futures, imagining the sound of their footsteps in our hallway, and just like that, the loneliness is covered over with a thick pink film. Falling in love is a terrifyingly accurate phrase because the gravity isn't coming from the other person. The gravity comes from the void inside us. We don't fall for them. We fall because we can no longer stand being alone with ourselves. When you find yourself saying, "I don't know why I'm so obsessed with them, they aren't even that special," that is your unconscious showing its hand. They don't have to be extraordinary. What they possess is the right frequency to sync with your emptiness. All they have to do is offer a glimmer of being seen. And your psyche latches on like a drowning man clutching the first hand that reaches into the dark. From a psychological standpoint, this kind of love is indistinguishable from an avoidance disorder. Instead of metabolizing feelings of emptiness, anxiety, and meaninglessness, we use the dopamine hit of a new connection to keep ourselves distracted. The ping of a message, the validation of a compliment, the fantasy of a shared life. These are all tiny rewards that help us temporarily forget the core question. If this person disappeared tomorrow, could I stand to be with myself? Most of us can't answer that. We don't want to. So we keep falling, over and over, like an addict chasing a high, just to avoid feeling how exhausted our own soul really is. Think of someone you know, or maybe yourself, who simply cannot tolerate being single. They break up on a Tuesday, and by Friday they're already talking to someone new. They feel lonely for a week, then go back to an ex they know is wrong for them. On the surface, they say, "I just can't help who I love." But deeper down, it's a frantic search for proof of existence. The feeling of being needed, of being the recipient of a "did you sleep okay?" text becomes the temporary evidence that they matter. So they keep loving, but it's the love of a person running away from a fire that follows them everywhere. Society even legitimizes this escape. Movies, music, and romance novels glorify a love that consumes you. The more dependent, the more dramatic, the more painful it is to let go, the more we call it real. But Jung looked at these cultural stories not with romantic eyes, but with the eyes of a diagnostician. He saw in them a cultural script that encourages people to use love as a way to avoid the emptiness of their inner lives. It's so much easier to obsess over "does he love me? Did she text back?" than it is to ask, what values am I living by? Who am I outside of my roles as a partner or a parent? Some love stories begin from a tiny, insignificant detail, a shared laugh, a fleeting compliment, and we inflate that moment until it fills our entire inner universe. Someone simply listens to you talk about your childhood, and you immediately think, finally, someone who understands me. In truth, they might just be being polite. But because you've never truly been listened to since you were a child, that shard of unmet need clings to anyone who offers a morsel of warmth. On a deeper level, this kind of love also allows us to escape responsibility for our own lives. When we believe our happiness depends on finding the one, we don't have to do the hard work of building a meaningful life ourselves. If I'm bored, I can blame it on being single. If I feel lost, I can hope that marriage will fix it. The other person becomes a project, a savior, a reason to postpone the terrifying question, if I never had a partner, what would I do with my life? Jung isn't against love. He simply warns us. When love becomes an excuse to avoid growing up, it has already been hijacked by the unconscious. We think we are looking for a partner to walk beside us, but in truth, we are often looking for a hiding place from our own maturation. This is why so many relationships crack the moment one person starts to change, to grow, to become more conscious. Because the relationship was built on the need to hide from each other, not on the foundation of two people willing to face life side by side. Try this. Look back at a time you were so infatuated with someone you lost your mind. Strip away all the romantic lines, the poetic justifications. What's left underneath? Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being alone with the noise in your own head. Those fears pulled you toward the other faster than any cosmic force ever could. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, share a piece of that story in the comments. Naming it is the first step toward honesty. This doesn't mean all love is an escape, but if you are honest with yourself, you'll see that before awakening, most of the times you fell in love coincided with something inside you that you were desperately trying to avoid. That love wasn't a meeting between two whole people. It was a temporary handshake between two souls looking for a place to hide. Only when we recognize this do we have a chance to move to a different level of understanding. But to get there, we first have to dare to look straight at an uncomfortable truth. There's a good chance that in all those times you proudly said you gave your all to love, Jung would quietly ask a different question. Did you really love? Or did you just run very fast from yourself and call that run love? Chapter 2. The Projection Machine. Part 2. The mechanism of projection. We've talked about falling in love as a way of running from ourselves. But how does the run actually work? Emotion alone isn't enough. There has to be a subtle, invisible mechanism that transforms an ordinary, flawed human being into a figure of destiny. That mechanism is what Jung called projection. It is the psychological process where we unconsciously take the contents of our own inner world, our unresolved pain, our hidden strengths, our deepest fears, and paint them onto someone else, then treat those paintings as if they are objective reality. Jung said that projections change the world into a replica of one's own unknown face. This is why two people can meet the exact same person and have radically different opinions about them. One sees a warm, deep soul, the other sees a cold, calculating stranger. The truth is, neither is actually seeing the person clearly. They are both only seeing their own projection. In love, this mechanism becomes extraordinarily powerful. When you are feeling incomplete, lonely, and emotionally unmoored, anyone who touches the right nerve inside you can become a savior in your eyes. They don't have to do anything extraordinary, but your unconscious instantly paints them with gold. She's like no one I've ever met. He was made for me. Yet if you went back and replayed what they actually said and did, you'd see most of it was ordinary, even mundane. Projection is so dangerous because it is incredibly convincing. You don't feel like you're imagining things. You don't think, I'm starving for love, so I'm going to interpret his politeness as adoration. You simply state with absolute certainty, he adores me. You don't say, I'm terrified of being abandoned, so I'm going to cling. You say, we have a special connection. I can feel it in my bones. That feeling of certainty, that I just know sensation, is the proof that projection is working hard. The less self-awareness you have, the more room projection has to grow. Think back on a relationship you later had to ask yourself, what on earth was I thinking back then? What made you so sure they were deep, mature, and different from everyone else? Were they truly like that? Or did you simply need them to be that way, so you chose to believe it? In love, it's not just the ugly parts that get projected. We also project the beautiful, missing parts of ourselves. We project onto the other the tenderness we lack, the strength we haven't dared to cultivate, the wisdom we haven't tapped into within ourselves. Instead of saying, I need to become someone who can protect myself, we say, he will protect me. Instead of saying, I need to learn how to be kind to myself, we say she will soothe me. It sounds so much easier. The unconscious escapes the responsibility of growth by placing that task onto someone else and calling it love. The fascinating thing is that projection doesn't just create an idealized image of the other. It secretly defines your role in the relationship as well. If you project onto them the image of the strong, stable rescuer, you instantly shrink into the role of the fragile, helpless one who needs saving. You start acting like that, speaking like that, making choices like that. The unconscious reinforces this role deeper and deeper. In the end, you aren't two individuals in a relationship. You are two characters in a script you wrote without ever knowing you were holding the pen. In Jung's view, most love dramas aren't happening between two mature adults. They are happening between projections. The wounded child inside you is arguing with the mask of a betrayer you've placed on the other. Your invisible fear is demanding that they constantly prove their loyalty. Your need for control is masquerading as I'm just worried about you. It all spins in the dark, and we call it a complicated love. This mechanism will keep repeating itself with different faces until you notice that the common denominator isn't that they were all terrible, but that the film reel inside your own mind has never been changed. The moment of awakening begins when you dare to call these projections back, to see the other as they truly are, a limited, contradictory human being. Sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, partly compatible with you, and partly not. And more brutally, to see yourself as you are, not as the heroic victim or the noble lover you play in your own stories. But that's the story for the next chapter. Chapter 3. The Curtain Falls. Part 3. The Moment of Awakening. Awakening doesn't arrive with soft music and a golden sunrise. It comes with the unsettling feeling that everything has gone flat. The words that once made you weep now sound like memorized lines. The gestures that once made you believe you were finally loved now reveal their clumsiness, their limits, even their hidden selfishness. You realize you've been reading volumes of meaning into the most ordinary of actions. Yesterday, they cared about every detail of your life. Today, you suddenly see they are just someone who likes to be in control. Yesterday, they were profound and empathetic. Today, you realize they are simply a sad person looking for someone to lean on. The colored lens over your eyes cracks, and the world is no longer shimmering. At that moment, Jung calls this the beginning of the withdrawal of projections. The first feeling isn't relief. It's panic. It's like being in the middle of a gripping movie when the screen suddenly goes black and the theater lights snap on. You're no longer lost in the story. You're just sitting in a chair in an ordinary room, surrounded by strangers. When that backdrop falls, the person you love no longer appears as your destiny. They appear as a normal human being, sometimes brave, sometimes cowardly, often selfish, limited, carrying their own wounds. If you're honest, you'll notice a part of you desperately wants to yank that backdrop back up, to return to the old film. But once you've seen the crack, it's almost impossible to pretend it was never there. If you've ever had a moment like that, where the light suddenly came on, try writing a little about it below. Who it was, what you realized, and how from that day forward, you never looked at love the same way. You don't have to tell the whole story. Just a small piece, enough to acknowledge that in that moment, you stop turning away from the truth. Psychology calls this the moment of disillusionment. But for Jung, it is also a spiritual turning point. Because it's not only the image of the other that collapses. The entire structure of your ego within that relationship shakes. You don't just lose the ideal lover, you also lose the role of the chosen one, the special one. When the other is no longer the hero of the story, you are no longer the main character either. And for the ego, losing the role often hurts more than losing the person. The natural reaction is denial. People tell themselves, everyone has flaws. I just need to accept them. But in truth, they aren't learning to love what's real. They are trying to tape the ideal backdrop back together. They compromise. As long as he stays, it's okay. As long as she still loves me, I can ignore this. They agree to keep living inside the play, as long as they don't have to face the fact that the love they worshipped was built largely out of their own illusions. Jung says this is where the ego fights against awakening. Because seeing the truth means you have to take responsibility for your own projections. You can no longer blame fate, or timing, or the other person. But if you don't go back to sleep, if you let the light stay on, what happens then? After the initial waves of panic and anger, there is usually a huge, hollow space. You feel lost inside the very relationship you once called home. You sit beside this person, but the sense of familiarity has evaporated. The story you used to tell each other feels stale. Every attempt to rekindle the old passion starts to look like trying to rescue a stage whose floorboards have already rotted. That emptiness makes many people think, I must be falling out of love. But if you look more closely, you'll see this is not the death of love. It is the death of projection. Jung often emphasized that when projections dissolve, we have for the first time the chance to see the other as an independent being, no longer just a mirror of ourselves. This is both liberating and frightening. Liberating because you no longer have to strain to maintain a perfect picture. Frightening, because you realize this person can leave at any time. They were not born to heal you. They have their own world, their own pain, their own path. Many people can't bear this truth. They'd rather cling to the idea of bound destiny than accept the reality of two separate beings who may walk together today and part ways tomorrow. In the moment of awakening, a very different question begins to arise. If this person is no longer my savior, then why am I here? This question strikes at the foundation of the relationship. You realize that many things you called sacrifice and unconditional giving were actually a kind of unconscious bargain. I give you everything. You must prove I am worthy of love. When you see this contract for what it is, there are two possibilities. You feel ashamed and want to run from yourself, or you sit down and adjust the way you love. But whichever you choose, you can't go back to loving the way you did before. Now you know. The moment the curtain falls is also the moment you realize you no longer know who you are in this story. If you're no longer someone's ideal lover, no longer a half, no longer the chosen one, then who are you? This question hurts more than the breakup itself. And this is the crossroads. Either you rush to find someone new to fill the void, or you stay in that dim, uncomfortable space and look closely at your own face without makeup. The second path is the real path of awakening. But it is also much lonelier and slower than diving into a new romance to prove you're still desirable. The most important thing in this moment is to understand you are not stupid for having projected. You simply did what the human psyche naturally does when it isn't conscious enough. Jung doesn't condemn projection. He sees it as a necessary phase. The mistake only begins when you have seen the truth and still choose to close your eyes. Accepting this doesn't destroy love. It only destroys illusion. From here, the story moves into a different landscape. You will have to learn how to stand steady before the truth that no one was born to save you. And precisely in that raw emptiness, another way of loving can begin to take shape. No longer grounded in projection and escape, but in two people learning to look at each other with eyes no longer covered by so many colored lenses. Chapter 4. The Desert of the Soul. Part 4. Loneliness and the process of individuation. When the curtain of illusion falls, it's not just the love story that changes. Your entire inner world shifts tone, and this is when a new chapter opens. The journey of you, walking alone through what Jung called the desert of the soul. At first, this desert takes on a very familiar shape. The days you wake up with no good morning text. The weekend nights that suddenly stretch on endlessly, because there's no one to tell your stories to. The tiny habits that used to spin around one person now hang in the air with nowhere to land. But if it stops at missing your ex, this is not yet the desert. The real desert begins when you realize that even if they came back, even if someone new appeared, the space in your chest would still be there. Loneliness no longer wears the face of one specific person. It turns into a vast, almost frightening inner expanse. Jung called individuation the journey of becoming oneself. But it sounds like a beautiful quote until you brush against it with your own skin. In reality, it feels like being torn away from everything that once gave you a sense of who you are. You are no longer someone's other half. You are no longer someone's lover. You are just me. But who is this me beyond all those labels? Not many people are willing to stay with that question long enough. Because the moment you truly ask it, everything else starts to feel strangely dull. From a psychological point of view, this is the phase where libido, your life energy, starts withdrawing from the external objects it used to cling to and turns inward. You no longer have much appetite for chasing emotional highs. You no longer feel thrilled at the prospect of a new crush, just to prove you're still desirable. You grow tired of half-hearted conversations and makeshift relationships that only serve to fill time. Others may look at you and say, "You've become so distant." so cold. But they have no idea that inside, you are walking through a vast territory you've never explored before. This desert comes with a very different kind of loneliness. It's not the feeling of being abandoned. It's not the sense that no one loves me. It's like the first time you turn off all the noise. Put your phone down. Stop looking for someone to distract you. And just sit still in a dark room. At first, your mind will try everything to escape. It will beg you to put on music, to scroll, to text anyone. But if you hold the silence long enough, other sounds start to rise. You begin walking through rooms you've always kept locked. A forgotten memory returns so vividly you can almost smell the air of that day. A parent's old sentence, "You'll never amount to anything," suddenly echoes in the middle of the night. The face of your younger self, crying with no one to comfort them, appears like a quiet ghost. You realize it wasn't your most recent lover who hurt you this much, but a long line of moments you weren't seen, weren't chosen, weren't held, all queuing up inside you. Jung said that the self, the totality within us, only truly emerges when the persona, the mask we show the world, and the shadow, the parts we hide, begin to stand side by side in our awareness. The desert is where those two parts meet. You see yourself not only as the good one, the one who sacrifices, but also as someone selfish, afraid, controlling, and dependent. You see that you both want to be loved, and are willing to suffocate the one you love out of fear of being left. You no longer have the strength to tell only half the story about yourself, and although that makes you ashamed, disappointed, even self-hating, this is exactly the first step of individuation. Daring to see the whole of who you are, without picking and choosing, without Photoshop. During this stage, many people fall into a strange feeling of not belonging. You sit among friends as they talk about crushes, drama, breakups, and makeups. And it's as if you're watching an old movie. You understand those emotions because you've lived them, but something in you has stepped out of the game. You no longer feel excited hearing "just love, don't overthink," because you know that very don't think is what pulled you into so many painful plays. You're not good at joining conversations that complain men are all the same or women are all the same. Because at a deeper level, you see the problem lies in all the unexamined content inside each person. This understanding doesn't make you feel superior. It just makes you feel more alone. Of course, this process is anything but poetic. There will be days you crave a pair of arms so badly, you tremble. Then you realize you can't go back to half-hearted relationships just to ease your loneliness. There will be nights you open old conversations, your thumb hovering over the send button, then stopping because you know that if you send it, you are betraying the truth you've already seen. In others' eyes, this looks like coldness, but to the soul, it is a new kind of loyalty. Loyalty to the path you're on, to the new seeing that has just begun to form. Individuation doesn't require you to leave the world, but it does force you to leave behind the illusions that once worked like anesthetics. It doesn't tell you to never love again. It tells you to stop using love as a reason to not face yourself. In the desert, you learn to embrace the parts you once threw onto others, to comfort yourself instead of waiting to be soothed, to protect your own boundaries instead of blaming others when they cross them, to ask, "What do I need?" instead of hoping someone will automatically know. These are tiny steps, but each time you manage one, a bit of power is handed back from others into your own hands. And then, at some point on the journey, you'll notice something strange. Being alone is no longer a punishment. It becomes a natural state. You can still feel sad. You can still sometimes wish someone were there, but the panic is gone. That is the sign that the desert has begun to turn into a kind of private sanctuary, where you finally meet yourself without needing any great love as an intermediary. If you're still here listening up to this point, thank you for daring to stay with yourself this long. Not everyone dares to look into that hollow space in their chest without rushing to find someone new to plug it. If you want to keep walking with us to the end of this journey, where we'll talk about a different kind of love that comes after you've met yourself again, stay. Don't click away yet. And if you feel that what you've just heard sounds like someone finally saying out loud what you've never dared to name, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so that each time you're about to run away from yourself, we can still meet again here. Chapter 5, Love After the Fall, Part 5, Standing in Love. So, if we still love, what does that love look like? When someone no longer agrees to fall blindly, how do they love? This is where falling in love gives way to something more mature, standing in love. Falling in love is the image of a fall, of losing your center, of being swept away from yourself. Standing in love is a completely different posture. You step into love standing upright on your own 2 feet. You don't dissolve into the other. You don't melt yourself down just to fit their shape. You stand there with your own history, your own values, your own limits, your own inner life. And from that place of clarity, you reach out your hand and say, I want to walk with you. Jung once said that true maturity is not dissolving into another, but standing firm as an individual, while still being able to connect deeply. Standing in love is exactly that state, not hiding inside each other, but standing side by side. As Jung wrote, the meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for that transformation to be healthy, both substances must be stable to begin with. In this kind of love, the sentence "you are my everything" suddenly sounds off. The awakened one understands that if they turn the other into everything, they are once again placing their entire psychic life into the hands of another limited human being. Instead, the sentence inside them sounds more like, "You are not everything, but you are a part of my life that I cherish and choose to keep." That hands freedom back to love. Love is no longer a contract guaranteeing absolute safety, but a shared space where 2 people can both live, take care of themselves, and be responsible for their own lives. One very clear sign of standing in love is the absence of games. The awakened person is no longer interested in going silent to test the other's feelings, posting ambiguous things to provoke jealousy, or disappearing for days just to see how tightly the other will cling. They understand that every time they do that, they are turning both themselves and the other into objects to be manipulated, rather than 2 human beings to be respected. They choose to speak plainly instead. This bothers me. This doesn't feel right to me. I need space. I need time. Hidden inside these simple statements is something that used to be very rare. Taking responsibility for your own emotions. Let me share a story from someone who wrote to us. After a period of separation, she and her partner came back together. She said, in the past, being angry meant giving the silent treatment, fighting intensely, and criticizing each other. Now it's different. I still get upset, but instead of throwing all the blame at him, I choose to say, when that happened, I felt disrespected. He also no longer reacts by attacking me. He sighs and says, I hear you, but I can feel that I'm still defensive inside. I probably need a bit more time to understand why. Suddenly I realized we no longer used arguments to see who would win, who would lose, who would back down first. The air was still tense, but it no longer felt like a battlefield. It was more like a slightly cramped room, where the 2 of us were forced to look at what we are doing to each other, and what we are doing to ourselves. In standing love, personal boundaries are not a threat. They are the condition that keeps love from becoming devouring. An awakened person can love deeply, but they will not easily ignore the feeling of being crossed just to keep the peace. They are willing to say no even when they're afraid of losing the other. They can say, I love you, but I don't accept the way you speak to me when you're angry. Or, I really value you, but I don't agree with this style of control. In the past, such sentences might have made them panic about losing the person. Now these truths matter more than that fear. Because they know that if love can only exist when they stay silent about what hurts them, that isn't love. It's a contract of endurance. Another characteristic of love after awakening is that the two no longer need to cling tightly to prove they love each other. Before, distance meant risking losing them. Now, distance is the space for each person to keep growing, to continue living their own life. They still go out with friends, still pursue their passions, still invest in other relationships. Not because they lack affection, but because they understand that a single romantic bond cannot carry the entire meaning of a human life. As Jung would say, their life energy has been distributed more diversely into creativity, meaningful work, and connection with self, rather than being poured entirely into one object. This kind of love also looks straight at impermanence. There are no more forever vows made just to reassure each other. They know people change, circumstances change, life paths can diverge, and they know that doesn't make today's love any less real. So instead of obsessing over how long will we be together, they care more about the question, while we are still walking together, how are we treating each other? The awakened one accepts that no one can hold the future, so they are all the more conscious about being clean, kind, and honest in each day they still have together. This doesn't make post-awakening love any less painful. It can still make your chest tighten when the other speaks carelessly. It can still make you sad when you have to part ways because your paths no longer align. The difference is this: the pain no longer drags self-destruction along with it. You no longer collapse to the point of forgetting who you are. You can sit there crying, hurting bit by bit, but underneath there is a foundation whispering, I will not lose myself again. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about standing in love is the freedom it offers. Both sides. You don't need the other to breathe. So, you don't need to lock them up to feel safe. You can truly say, I want you to be happy, even if at some point that no longer means being with me. Not as a lofty movie line, but as something you can genuinely bear. You know that if one day you must part, you will hurt, but you won't turn yourself into wreckage to force them to stay out of guilt. And precisely because of that, if they choose to stay, their presence has a different quality. It's no longer penance. It's no longer fear of your collapse. It's a decision made in freedom. Love after awakening might look like ordinary evenings. Awkward but honest conversations. Tiny adjustments so you both can breathe a bit easier. To an ego still addicted to intensity, all this seems boring. But to a soul exhausted by loves that always end in ruins, this is the only thing strong enough to sustain it in the long run. A love that doesn't make you fall, but keeps you standing firmly beside another without dissolving. At this point, you can probably see why the awakened are no longer easily swept off their feet. It's not because they've gone numb. It's because they have changed their understanding of love. They no longer demand that love must burn wildly to feel real. They choose a kind of connection that can walk with them through ordinary days, through silence, through difference. And only when they stop falling into love like a blind plunge do they finally become capable of standing in love with eyes wide open, and a heart that no longer has to pay with its own inner freedom. Conclusion. By now, you may have realized that the original question, why do the awakened no longer fall in love, was flawed from the start. It's not that they've lost the ability to love. It's that they are no longer willing to use love as a blanket to cover the cracks inside. When the fog lifts, love has nowhere left to hide. Either it returns to its true shape, or it leaves. And between those two possibilities, the thing that truly changes is your gaze. From looking for someone to save you, to learning how to walk beside someone without abandoning yourself. Jung doesn't take away your romance. He only takes away your illusions, to see if you are brave enough to keep what remains. You may love fewer times, with less noise, but each time you choose to step in, it will be a conscious decision, not an unconscious fall. And if one day you find yourself standing in a relationship where you don't have to shrink, don't have to perform, don't have to beg to stay, then that is very likely not just love for the other person, but proof that at last, you have stopped turning your back on yourself.